Hi everybody. Very excited to introduce you to my Crime and Cold Climates panel, who are going to start us off with an introduction to themselves and their books, starting with Jack at the top.
I'm writing a series of spy thrillers set in the 1980s for Penguin, and the first one kicks off in deep midwinter in Moscow and ends in the snow-deep countryside outside Stalingrad. So that's my tie into the winter. My current book is a standalone set in the 1940s. It takes place in summer, so that doesn't actually count. But the one I'm currently writing is set in the north of Norway, on that kind of 180 or so mile border between what was the Soviet Union and Norway, which was one of the softest borders for the Iron Curtain. And that is in absolute deep midwinter and total darkness. Darkness is coming in as the book progresses.
Awesome. Helen?
Oh, hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm based in Inverness in the Scottish Highlands. Although we don't have the same kind of extremes of temperature as Scandinavia or Russia, it can be pretty cold up here and particularly prone to being quite stormy, which makes for quite good atmospheric crime writing, I think. I'm the author of the D.S. Joe Galbraith books. This is the first one, In the Shadow of the Hill, and also Madness Lies was the sequel. They're both set in Inverness in the Outer Hebrides. Of course, the Outer Hebrides are particularly prone to blustery and windy and cold weather as well. And I've written two psychological thrillers. This one, Unraveling, came out recently. It's set in Inverness. And I have another due to come out next month called Deception. It's set in Edinburgh. And I'm very excited that the paperback has just arrived this week. So those are the books that I have currently published or I'm about to publish. And I've also written another thriller set in Edinburgh featuring a crime scene cleaner, and I hope that that's going to start to be a series of books. The first one is called Queen of Grime. It's now finished, and I'm hoping to publish it later on next year, and I've just started the second in that series. So.
Daniel?
Sounds good.
Hi guys, Daniel Morgan, write as Morgan Green. I'm coming to you today from sunny British Columbia. It's a balmy minus 15 outside this morning, so that's why I'm all wrapped up like this. I'm the author of the Detective Jamie Johansson series, which is set in Sweden, and it gets pretty cold there. So Angel Maker is set in kind of the heart of winter as well. So very icy streets and, lots of tramping about in the snow and frozen lakes and that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's I love to experiment with kind of the weather as a character. And it's one of my favorite things that underpins Scandi Noir is that every single Scandi Noir book tends to have two villains or two antagonists, and that's usually the killer and the weather. So yeah, it's lots of fun kind of playing around with that sort of thing, and hopefully being in freezing cold British Columbia will help to inspire those kind of moody, dreary, freezing cold, dangerous, snowy scenes. So yeah, that's pretty much me.
So you've already touched on it with you being in British Columbia, but Sam has asked where we're all speaking from today. So I'm in Yorkshire.
I'm in Inverness. Yeah.
And I'm in a sleepy little town called Nelson. So.
Oh.
And Jack, where are you?
Oh, sorry, I'm in Edinburgh.
Oh, you're in Edinburgh, right?
Nice. So location. Why did you all choose the locations that you did for your novels? And what does that mean, like research-wise, for you as well? I'm imagining some of you got some quite big research challenges setting them in different countries. Do you want to start us off, Daniel?
Yeah, sure. So I finished writing the sort of prequel trilogy, which was kind of supposed to be the mainline series at the time, which was sort of set in London, and I had always wanted to kind of take Jamie back to her sort of home country of Sweden, I guess. I just wasn't totally sure how to do it. Because I've always loved sort of Scandi Noir and that kind of thing, and I always wanted to kind of transition that way. And the company that I work for as a copywriter, my day job, is they're based in Sweden. So I had lots of help from my co-workers kind of making sure that all the translations were right and that kind of thing, and helping kind of use them as a sounding board really to kind of describe how it actually feels to sort of live there and that kind of thing. So I chose to set it there partially out of kind of that I wanted to do something Scandi, but partially because I could, and I had the kind of the ability to inject some kind of authenticity from people who live there. So when it came down to it, I thought Stockholm was the kind of the largest city and was the kind of most accessible, I guess, for kind of international and British readers, because a lot of larger Scandi noir kind of series, both books and television, are set kind of in and around Stockholm, and I thought it would be kind of a solid anchor point. So that's where kind of Angel Maker was set, and then the subsequent novels then sort of branch out away from there. So that's the reason that I chose sort of Sweden. And as far as the kind of research side of things goes, Google image search and Google Street View is really, really handy for that kind of thing. You just and it's really great. I mean, the internet allows us to walk up and down the street of pretty much any city or town in the world as if we're really there, and allowing that, and that gives us the kind of opportunity, I think, to really bring readers into what is practically the real world. And I really, really enjoy the fact that that's possible now, and that it's a case of opening up so many possibilities for authors to kind of explore foreign places and take readers with them on the journey that they go on, whether it's kind of physical or virtual.
Good answer. Helen?
Well, I set my first novel in Inverness because I live here and come from here. And at that stage, I mean, it was published in 2014, but I was writing it for several years before that, just tinkering away without really thinking about getting published. And at that stage, I kind of felt that the Highlands and Islands had been very much neglected in crime fiction. And I wrote, it was a place I knew, so I decided, to set it there. And the Outer Hebrides, I'd lived in the Outer Hebrides for 9 years, and I go there I spend a lot of time there. So I decided to use the two settings because I, as I say, knew them well and felt they'd been neglected. And of course, not long before In the Shadow of the Hill was published, Peter May's 3 Lewis-based books were published, and suddenly, there seemed to be quite a lot of people setting crime fiction in the Highlands. And since then, it's just bloomed. There's, several big authors now have set their fiction there. So, I mean, that's great. It's great to see that. In terms of research, as I say, I knew both areas fairly well, but it still meant quite a lot of, research trips myself to the islands, and a lot of taking videos and photos and looking back at them afterwards when I was writing, but also like Daniel, using the Google Maps an awful lot. However, I did find I came a bit unstuck with In the Shadow of the Hill because it's set in South Harris, and for some reason, the particular area that I need to research most has a big cloud over it on Google Maps. It's been like that for years, so I can't see it. But that meant I had to go there and take, as I say, lots of videos, lots of pictures and what have you. But research has changed completely since I started writing. I used to, when I lived in Stornoway for a couple of years, I used to spend Saturday afternoons in the library with a notebook with a list of topics that I needed to research. This was before I started writing crime fiction. I was working on historical and contemporary fiction at the time, and I loved my Saturday afternoons there. It was great, but I no longer go to a library now to research. Everything is just at the press of a button, and it's just so handy. I would hate anyone to analyze my research history, some of the subjects, particularly in writing the latest series with the crime and trauma scene cleaner. Some of my search histories and some of the things that I've viewed on the internet have been quite disturbing, but enjoyable too. So.
I'm sure the police have a list, and it's just they're just writers, comes up with
Yes.
disposing of bodies.
Absolutely.
The library thing is really interesting because when I started, if you wanted to know the price of something, you had to go and find a catalogue from the year you were writing about. And that meant going and finding a library that had an Argus catalogue for 74 and looking at what a space hopper cost or whatever.
Yes.
So that could take you a couple of days. And so the Google thing has really speeded up.
It really has.
The other thing is I used to draw a lot of the scenes. I used to sketch streets and walk down the street and write what the shops were either side of it, so that I could describe it to someone walking down the street and they'd have the right shops in the right places and the right things on the right corners. Now you just take up your iPhone and just 500 photographs later, you've got whatever it is. I mean, the research for Moscow, basically I went to Moscow in the mid-80s at the beginning of the changeover for perestroika. And I was lucky enough to spend a couple of weeks there, and you could get the sense that everything was changing. And I wanted to write a series of books set in that period of change leading up to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so I pretty much drew on memory. But the hardest thing was tracking down guidebooks and maps for that period, because you needed the guidebooks to know what shops foreigners could go into and what hotels foreigners could go into, but also because they've renamed all the roads. So, with the fall of the Soviet Union, everything is now called something else. So you have to find out, by maps of what it was before. The one I'm writing at the moment, the one set in Norway, is just based on the fact that I grew up on an island outside Oslo. So it's for part of my teens. So I have, again, memories of it, but also, it's a real indulgence, but I'm going to Finland next month to go ice fishing because I've got 2 or 3 chapters about ice fishing in the book, and I want to kind of make sure I've got it right, because it's a very, very long time since I've done that.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Assuming we're not all closed down. But...
Yes.
Yeah.
We've got a few hellos. So we've got Patricia, my dad David, Leslie and Laura have all said hello.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Yes, hi.
Yeah. Lovely to see you again.
Now, interestingly, I want to pick up on what Helen said about her research history. What's the craziest or sort of most interesting kind of research rabbit hole you've all been down? So we start with Jack at the top. He looks puzzled.
Bizarrely, probably food. Because I tend to try to get the right food into the books and the right recipes into the books. I've gone down some real rabbit holes. Not with these books, but I was doing a book. I wrote a book for Canongate, which was set in the run-up to the French Revolution, and I needed original recipes, and that was an absolute nightmare. And I just disappeared into this tiny spiral of trying to find late, 1700 cookbooks. But mostly, I can get obsessed researching anything. I mean, I spent 3 months researching Alexandria in about the 1890s or something, as back history. And by the time I got all the maps and all the photographs and drawn up my own plans of the city, I mean, I literally wasted 12 weeks. It didn't mean that when I started writing, I had every single thing in my head. So I'd never had to go back and look up the research. It was there.
Yeah, that's good.
Helen?
Yeah, I'm sure I've been down many rabbit holes. I can't think of some terribly interesting or exciting ones at the moment. But I suppose police procedure I found quite a minefield really. And luckily, I think it was on my second book. A friend's husband was a policeman, and he gave me quite a lot of helpful tips. For instance, I had a armed response unit flying, a helicopter, from Inverness to the Black Isle to, the scene of the sort of final denouement of the book. And my friend's husband told me you're not allowed to have arms on a helicopter. So I didn't put that in. I was always very grateful, or the police are not allowed to carry arms on helicopters. And I was always very grateful I put that in. And then I used to watch, things like Shetland and see that they had, a helicopter with arms, and I used to think, haha, they got that wrong. But recently I read somewhere that actually you are allowed in certain circumstances. And I think it would depend on the place, and probably Shetland would be one of the exceptions that you'd be allowed to do that. But at the time I was really grateful that I hadn't, put that in my book, just, in case there was something that, that was completely a no-no. So I find that quite difficult, and I've spent a lot of time on police procedure. But more recently, for Deception, the novel that comes out in January, I used Graham Bartlett's advice service for police procedure, and spoke to a former Police Scotland officer who gave me some wonderful advice on police procedure. And I think that's what I would do in future. I would, go and do that rather than spend the hours that I've spent reading, because quite often I'll find something that I think is going to be really interesting, a police document, and then I find it's redacted so much that I can't make any sense of it anyway. It's very hard to get the kind of information that you might want. I do try and not to get too bogged down, because I'm not sure that many readers will know if the procedure is correct or not, but I don't want any huge mistakes in it. Rabbit holes are definitely an easy trap to fall into. And I found that writing, particularly Madness Lies, my second book, I ended up deleting a huge, thousands and thousands of words of that book. Not so much rabbit holes, but just plot lines and secondary characters that didn't really go anywhere, but I spent ages on them, and then suddenly thought, that they've got to go. So there's certainly potential for wasting a lot of time down rabbit holes or on plots that just don't really work. So, yeah.
What about you, Daniel?
I think probably the most time-consuming rabbit hole I ever fell down was probably digging into the history of the gun company Remington. There's a part in Angel Maker where Jamie kind of finds her father's old hunting rifle, and I just wanted to make sure the model was correct for the year that he would have got it, kind of thing, and the model was available to buy in Sweden, and it would have been correct, and it had the right ammunition and this and that. So I just disappeared down this rabbit hole, and it's Jamie she's very interested in kind of in guns and weapons, and just because her father kind of taught her to hunt, and she used to compete in biathlon when she was kind of a teenager. So she's always been really interested in that. So for me, it's always a case of making sure that when I talk about kind of guns or weapons or something, it's because it's kind of lensed through Jamie's eyes, that like it's detailed and it's very kind of correct and accurate, because she takes kind of so much interest in that. So I often find myself kind of just scrolling through, just product pages for guns on random websites, where I'm just, I'm like, which one of these Sig Sauer P226 semi-automatic pistols would Jamie choose if she had the opportunity?
And you then get masses of spam from
I do,
trying to sell you fast draw holsters. And
Yes.
I'm just scrolling down Facebook, and I'm like, still interested in this like fully automatic shotgun, and I'm like, I am interested in that, but unfortunately I can't buy one. So, but we just found out kind of anecdotally here that hunting is very, very common in Canada, as you might kind of expect. But what I didn't realize was that hunting wolves here is legal and encouraged.
Oh.
So there's a huge issue here with wolves because of kind of roads and highways and like cities and things all springing up, and a lot of kind of highways have like fences down the side of them to stop kind of deer and things like running onto the road. But what that does is that kind of pens the deer in, which means that the wolves then can hunt much more easily, because they know that the deer are only going to be in a kind of a much smaller area than they might have been, because they're not kind of quite as migratory anymore. So the deer and elk populations are dropping, and the wolf populations are shooting up. So so if you've got a gun, you're encouraged to hop in your truck and go into the boonies and hunt the wolf. And we were just at some friend's house about 20 minutes over the kind of mountain pass here, and we were just chatting. We were saying, we had some footprints outside our house, and it was a black bear. And they were like, oh yeah, how big was it? This and that. They were like, oh yeah, it is a black bear. You'll know when you see a brown bear track. And I was like, wait, like a grizzly bear? And they were like, yeah, we get loads of them around here. They were like, now you're up on the mountain, like, look off to the side of the thing. And, very often you'll be driving up, to the ski hill in the morning, and just like a grizzly bear will just run across that. And I'm like, okay, right, well, that's a bit scary. And they were like, oh yeah, and there's wolves as well, and cougars. And I'm like, why have we moved to this place? They just apparently live among us. So they just said, don't go hiking on your own. Frightening.
So I want to know if you've always been interested in crime fiction writing, or was there something that drew you in? Should we start with Jack at the top again?
Ooh. There was a guy called Michael Dibson who wrote the Aurelio Zen series, and I read the first one of those, and was completely gripped and went out and bought more or less everything he wrote as he wrote it. He was one of the very few people that I bought in hardback rather than waiting for the paperback. And I've done that with a few people, and that brought me in. So I read crime fiction when I was younger. Then I stopped because I worked in publishing for a bit, and there's nothing like working in publishing for a bit to put you off actually reading books.
Yeah.
And then when I stopped working in publishing and went back to being a journalist, I went back to readings, and that coincided with things like Donna Leon's series set in Venice, which is absolutely amazing. And I think I was lucky enough to get sent a very early proof of that, of one of the early ones. And so again, I go out and I buy Donna Leon in hardback. I think it's always been there, but it's always been there in a mix with other areas, with general fiction and literary fiction and science fiction. And I mean, a lot of genre. I read a lot of genre in between reading. Well, it's all genre.
What made you write crime particularly?
I really like crime, and I like the going into a place and unpicking it for yourself, unpicking it for the reader, and unpicking it for your hero or heroine. So
I'm glad you explained that, because when you
Yes.
first said, like, I was thinking, well, that's a bit ominous. You're just like, okay.
Yeah.
No, you can go into a city and you explain the city to yourself, you explain the city to your reader, and you explain the city to your character. And I started off with 3 novels set in North Africa, featuring a half Berber detective that I wrote at least 20 years ago now. And they were a fantastic chance to research. And I spent a lot of time in Marrakesh, and I went to a cookery school and learned to cook North African cookery and listened to a lot of the music. And it was a slightly alternate. The Ottoman Empire hadn't fallen. The First World War had ended. The Second World War never happened. So it was an alternate history, and it was sold as alternate history. And then a paperback came out and they published it as crime. And I was in that slightly strange situation of having books in the science fiction section and in the crime section, and them being the same books, but with slightly different covers. And I thought, all right, this is interesting. And then I thought, well, okay, if I can do it in an alternate world, why don't I do it in this world? So that's what I did. So that's how Moscow started. And basically, I'd put little elements of supernatural in it, and Penguin would take the little elements of supernatural out again. And we'd play this little game to see whether or not I could get stuff in. And when it was published, and I pointed out that one of the characters is effectively the spirit of Moscow, I think my editor was slightly appalled, but it was fine.
Excellent. Helen?
Well, I've always loved reading crime fiction and watching crime dramas, but I had no intentions of writing it. I started writing historical and contemporary fiction after moving from Inverness to Edinburgh quite a long time ago. And it was funny that, having been brought up in the Highlands, it took the move to Edinburgh before I actually became particularly interested in Highland and Island history and culture, and started to learn Gaelic. Despite having Gaelic-speaking parents, I didn't really know any until I moved to Edinburgh. Anyway, I decided then to start writing, and as I say, I wrote some contemporary and historical fiction. Wrote quite a huge novel that was set partly in modern time and partly in 18th century St Kilda. And I always thought that was the kind of writing I would do. But then I moved from Edinburgh to the Western Isles, and then I moved from the Western Isles to Fife. And I went along to a writing group in Fife for the first time ever. I'd been quite a closet writer until then. And this writing group wrote short stories every week. That wasn't something I wanted to do. I'd written short stories when I was in school. I wasn't interested in writing them. However, I did this because that was what they did. And I wrote a short story about 2 young boys on an island, an unidentified island. And they liked the story, and I took it to another writers group in Edinburgh, and they really liked it. And somebody there said that would make a really good novel. It'd be great to find out what happened to these 2 wee boys when they grew up. And that short story is now the prologue to In the Shadow of the Hill. And it, when I started to think about the idea of turning it into a novel, I started to think about what the two boys might have done, as they grew up, what careers they might have had. And I just decided to make one of them a policeman, probably because I enjoyed reading crime fiction so much myself. And that was really how it started. And I think there was a little bit of a cynical feeling that maybe crime fiction, there was more chance of getting published, and that, crime pays, so to speak. I can't say that's been the case, to be honest, but I just felt, that crime fiction is very, very popular, and that, it might be something good to get into. And now that I've done that, although I would still love to get my contemporary and historical fiction published, and have tried over the years, when I think about what I'm writing next, it's almost, it's always crime fiction. I haven't got any other ideas for historical or contemporary fiction. So I suspect, although I would love to and will keep trying to get those published, I suspect I'm firmly turned to crime now, and that will be what I'll be doing from now on, I think.
Well, who is with you in the room that you keep having a chat to?
My new dog, and she's not very. She doesn't know what's going on. She's hearing the voices.
We need to see.
Summer, come here. She's called Summer, which is not very appropriate for this. Are you coming up? Come on. Come and say hello. Look, who's this? Look, who's this?
Oh.
She's a wee darling, but I haven't had her for very long, and my work involves speaking on the phone and video conferences, and she gets very, very upset about this whole thing. She's very quiet. She doesn't bark or anything, but she just keeps coming and poking me when I'm busy with my work. So I thought I'd left her in the other room, and I thought I'd shut the door, but she managed to push it open and came through. So that's Summer.
They do. Yeah. Mine's more concerned with sleeping on the bed than he is.
Oh, right. He'd love to do that.
And the thing is, he knows he's not supposed to be on the bed. So the only reason he's up is because he knows I'm on a call and I can't turn around and shout at him.
He's going to get away with it.
Yeah, he's just looking around the corner of his eye, like, oh.
Yeah, she'll disappear in a minute, hopefully, and go and lie down somewhere.
No, keep her on your lap. Warm.
Everybody likes a visit from a.
They do.
From a dog or a cat, don't they? Yeah. Daniel, what about you for crime? What drew you into writing it?
I guess happenstance. Like Helen, my passion and my my genre of choice, I suppose, lies more in the kind of dystopian and science fiction sort of realms. And that's kind of pretty much where I wrote entirely until I started working as an author, as a ghostwriter, at which point I kind of transitioned to kind of space opera, I guess, and wrote some kind of military thrillers. And then at the end of that kind of run, we switched to write a kind of intergalactic noir, I suppose is the best way to put it. Sort of space set, planet hopping crime thriller, conspiracy thriller, really, with a kind of an interplanetary detective at the helm, and I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed kind of exploring the kind of chalk and cheese sort of kind of detective, mix up that classic kind of thing, and it was kind of partially inspired, I guess, a little bit by the James A. Corey novels, which has now been made into the Expanse television series, but. Yeah, following that, the contract ended, and my sort of publisher at the time said, "Oh, you seem to have a kind of knack for these sort of mystery things, and I think the mystery at the heart of the novel was kind of very good. I just don't think it was quite sort of positioned right to grab an audience and market it kind of correctly. But you should go out and try writing crime fiction if you kind of want to have a go at self-publishing. It would be the wisest idea, I guess, to try crime fiction," he said, and it was and it was something that I'd always read thrillers, and I still read kind of a lot of thrillers, and especially the kind of more science fiction-y ones, like Blake Crouch is kind of my favorite author, who wrote the Wayward Pines series and Dark Matter and Recursion, and and I just think that a thriller, like a crime novel as well, has the beauty of being able to be that and something else, whereas kind of a lot of other genres like science fiction, it's science fiction first, and that's kind of it, and anything else is just kind of secondary to that and kind of almost non-important, whereas crime can be crime and something else, and crime and this. And so I kind of chose crime as a kind of banner, I guess, or a veneer, and then kind of wanted to explore more of kind of those classic kind of noir novels and those classic kind of Scandi kind of themes. And now, as I've sort of continued to write it, I've come further and further away from the procedural crime thriller kind of style, more towards kind of a psycho thriller kind of thing, which suits me as a writer, and especially kind of suits kind of my correct kind of British procedure as well. But for me, it's the crime is a way, I think, to kind of allow me to explore other things, I guess, in terms of wanting to make a mystery novel, wanting to make a kind of a psycho novel that that really delivers the kind of experience, that thriller sort of experience, and that kind of psychological experience in a way that's very accessible. Because as Helen said, so many people love to read crime, and if you say to them, "Oh, I'm writing a science fiction novel with a crime element," or "I'm writing a psychological thriller with a crime element," a lot of people hear that first thing and then they go, "Oh, I don't really think that's going to be for me." Whereas if you say, "Oh, I'm writing a crime thriller with psychological kind of element," or write a crime thriller set in kind of Sweden, even if they wouldn't necessarily want to go for a Scandi novel or a psycho novel, they might kind of be pulled around by crime. And I think it just allows me to definitely access an audience that I don't think maybe would kind of be sold on that underlying premise. So I love crime, that it has such a passionate kind of community, and it really allows authors to just extend themselves a little bit more than I think they can with other genres. So I always just want to create a real enjoyable experience and a real sort of visceral experience as well. And I want the novels to kind of read like you're a kind of passenger in a car that's just kind of going down the motorway at 1,000 miles an hour. And I think that the kind of the crime fiction banner really allows me to kind of reach new readers and kind of take them on a journey that hopefully they feel is atypical from perhaps what the genre offers a lot of the time. So yeah, I think it's just a case of enjoying writing those kind of blends and kind of pushing the limits of what crime can be. I think that's what kind of draws me in, is that it's a big playing field and there's lots of room to kind of explore things.
Before I go on and ask you the next question, Patricia and Edith Harrison, Helen, have got some nice comments on the side about your book.
Oh, excellent. Oh, yes, I can see that. Read it in the Shadow of the Hill and enjoyed it. Oh, very good. I hope you get round to reading the second one, Edith and Patricia. That's great.
Always nice when you see a comment like that. Sam picks up on, you were saying, Jack, about sort of trying to sneak in the supernatural, and she said, have any of you ever either had to cut something that you loved from your book or had it cut?
All the time. You write a scene and it's written for you rather than for taking the narrative forward, and the editor goes, "We need that out." And then you have to decide whether or not you're going to have a fight to keep it in because it matters to you, or whether actually the editor is right and it has to go out. I mean, I had Moskva was published in the States, and the American publishers made an offer, but they wanted to do an American edit. And I said, "I can't, but you can." So they went off and they did their edit, and I think they took out, they took out the obvious things like pavement, put in sidewalk and that stuff. But I think they might have also taken out a couple of scenes that didn't work for their market. And so that's always interesting. And going back to the novels, the crime novels set in North Africa, I do remember an American publisher basically saying we can't have the references to climate change and global warming. And this was maybe 15, 20 years ago. And so they wanted it worded in a way that was not instantly, going to upset half their readers. And that was an interesting battle. So.
Interesting.
Yes, I mean, I do think you lose things, and I do think you have to have fights about whether you want particular things to go in or you don't want particular things to go in.
Is there anything
I like.
you'd wished you'd fought for?
Sorry.
Is there anything you wished you'd have fought for? That you
Oh
thought?
yeah, there are a couple of things I would really like to have got in that I didn't, that I compromised on and let go because we've been going on with that battle for too long, and there were other bigger battles ahead. I mean, someone once said to me, put in stuff you're willing to, put in stuff intentionally that you're willing to lose, so that when it comes to the battle, you can gracefully let go these 5 things and go to the absolute war on the 6th, which is the only thing that actually matters to you anyway. So, and that was a very well-known, very professional writer. And I thought, oh, that's interesting.
Interesting.
Hi, Helen.
I can't think of anything really. I think I've been quite fortunate. The first 2 novels were traditionally published, and I don't think the publishers took out anything that I particularly liked. I took out the stuff I mentioned myself for the second one, some storylines that didn't work. However, I kept them, and if I do go back to that series, I would hope to use some of them again. And my next 2 novels are independently published, so there was nobody really to tell me to take anything out, although I did have them professionally edited, and the editor was certainly excellent at suggesting things that didn't work, and in Deception in particular, the one that comes out in January, she suggested things, changing quite a bit of the plot, and taking out. She did actually decide. She did suggest I take out a character that she felt didn't work. It was a character I quite liked, but I could see exactly what she was saying. That he didn't really add an awful lot to it. He wasn't developed enough, to be crucial to the story. And she suggested combining his role with a character that was already there that needed a bigger part. So that's probably about the most. It's just the editor suggesting that. But I have heard some horror stories about people, not being allowed to use their own surname. There was, I once went to hear an author speak, and she had, I think she wanted to use maybe her maiden name, which was MacLeod with the Scottish spelling, Macleod, and the publisher told her you can't use that. English people won't be able to pronounce it, which is nonsense. And she had to pronounce it MC and then Cloud, Cloud. And she wasn't allowed the name of the book that she wanted it. And the book was set in Scotland, and she... But it could have been set anywhere. She had been told by the publisher to take out all references to the particular city it was in. It could have been in any city in the UK. It was an excellent book, but I just felt it was a shame. I felt she'd lost quite a lot just because her publisher decided that she had to take out these things, change the name of the book, and change even her own name. So I'm fortunate and glad that I haven't had to do that.
Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much sort of pure indie, so I get kind of carte blanche really. So luckily, I get to indulge myself a lot of the time, even when my kind of eagle-eyed beta readers would like me to make some changes. Sometimes I acquiesce to those, and I like to try and gather as much feedback as I can really from my kind of beta readers and from my advanced readers, and I listen very intently to their feedback, and then I try and kind of use the rest of the team and other readers then as a sounding board to say, this has been suggested, what do you think of this part? And I think if it comes up as a majority decision, I tend to just defer to kind of the majority really, because I think a lot of the time when you have an editor, they'll definitely be hypercritical of your work. But when you're kind of on your own, you're trying to write something and look at it and try and make a judgment as to whether or not, not you think it's good, but whether or not, the people who read it come into it blind and don't know you and don't know what your kind of intention is, whether at a kind of, possibly superficial level, whether it'll all make sense. So for me, I don't necessarily tend to cut a lot, but I write very consciously with the idea of whether or not it's going to happen, whether or not everything I put in will have kind of mass market appeal, or whether or not everything I put in is very clear. Because I think in the first 3 novels I put out as well, especially, I felt like I was putting in a lot of subtext, and I feel like those places where the kind of story was meandering on the surface, but it was kind of quite subtextual, or those are the kind of parts I think where people felt that it was dragging. So I think it's a case of trying to take out the parts that I feel are going to need taking out before I put them in now. So it's kind of, I don't know, future-proofing it, I guess, rather than kind of going back retrospectively, because I have quite an active editing and writing and planning kind of process where I sort of write and plan and edit things as I go, rather than sort of writing it all and then going back and kind of reviewing it as a whole, if that makes sense. So, yeah, so just a couple of questions, if that's okay. Donna says, has your move inspired any new stories? Yeah, so I'm using the kind of, the wolf inspiration and things for the next Jamie novel. And Leslie says, you don't like hunting. Yeah, I mean, nobody likes hunting, but, a lot of people around here have lost dogs to wolves. Like, that's quite a common thing, especially the people who live outside the city, where they'll put their dog out for a wee in the night and then just suddenly, that's it. So, yeah, so like hunting a lot of the time here is for self-protection. It's not just kind of for sport, but it is genuinely, people go out and they hunt, and a lot of people here are vegetarian and they'll hunt. So they won't buy meat in the supermarkets, but they'll go out and they'll hunt a deer, and then they'll have a local butcher kind of butcher it, and then they'll use the meat to like feed their animals and to kind of sustain themselves for months and months, and give it to friends and that kind of thing. Some friends are vegetarians up the road, people we went to, but he hunts a little bit, and they'll hunt a turkey and eat it for Christmas dinner, and then they'll use the rest of the turkey to feed their cats. So it's, I don't know, is that more sustainable than buying it at a supermarket? I don't know, it's an interesting moral question, but one that I'm not equipped to answer as an author. So don't ask me.
I'm just thinking, we're coming up to the end of the year. What are your favourite reads of this year? What's been your favourite reads of the year? Do you want to start us off this time, Daniel? Give Jack a bit of a rest, give him something to time.
Yeah, sure. So I think 3 novels I've really enjoyed this year. Recursion by Blake Crouch, very interesting novel. The follow-up to Dark Matter, it's a kind of science fiction novel that explores the idea of allowing somebody to travel back in time through their own memories. So they travel back in time to an anchor memory, and then they can relive their life over and over again from there. But obviously their decisions then kind of change the course of history and create like an alternate timeline. But very interestingly, the person who's doing that is not the only person who's doing that. So they're kind of racing to discover and develop this technology to be able to travel back while somebody else is doing the same thing. So it's very, very interesting, and there's lots of kind of alternate timelines, and it's super fun read. So I definitely recommend checking out Blake Crouch if you kind of have an open mind for that sort of thing. I also read the new Sapkowski book, the new Witcher novel, which was a very good. Season of Storms. That was good fun, and and I think Never Let Me Go I read by Ishiguro in the early part of the year, and that was a wonderful, wonderful character study, and I think anybody who enjoys just deep dives into characterization and doesn't mind a little bit of sort of science fiction and the current would really enjoy that, and should definitely give Ishiguro a go. So those are my top 3 reads of the year.
I'm making a note of them in my head. I love Never Let Me Go.
Yeah.
Gosh, because of when I was writing Unraveling, one of the main themes in it is mental illness, and so I ended up kind of Googling books on mental ill health, fictional books on mental health, just to see what was out there, and discovered a new author for me, Wally Lamb. I read a story called She's Come Undone, which I thought was wonderful. I've read another couple of his since then, and the names escape me at the moment, but I've really enjoyed him. I also read in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I've never read before. Oh, so I wonder she didn't hear that. She didn't react. Yeah, I mean, I've seen the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest several times, but I'd never read the novel, and it's just a wonderful novel. It's absolutely amazing. I would recommend that to anyone. The writing's fantastic. And so many books. There's so many good books, but at the moment I am reading both a book by each of my fellow authors on the panel. So I started sorry, is it Nightfall Berlin? I just started that this weekend, although I didn't realize it was the second in a series, so I may go back and read the first one first. And I'm reading Daniel's book. It's going to Angel. Yeah, Angel Maker. I'm further through that. I'm about more than halfway through that and enjoying that. But I must say, I particularly enjoyed the opening scene of the isolation Berlin. It certainly grabbed me. The whole happenings on the water there. That was quite intriguing. And so I'm looking forward to reading both of those. But I just find there are so many wonderful books. It's just, and I've got such a list to be read on my Kindle that I just can't keep up with them. And I was trying to have a quick look at my Kindle there just to see if there were any others that popped out this year, because I'm sure there were many. I tell you, one book I really enjoyed, completely different from crime this year, was The Diary of Isabella M. Smoot, written by Ruth Lee. And I came to find out about her because she was involved in a blog tour when my book Unraveling came out. So she did a blog and a review of Unraveling, which then led me to read her book. And that was wonderful. I love it. It was a sort of almost Bridget Jonesy type diary, but quite a lot more to it, and just a great way to escape from, because I do tend to read probably too much crime, and sometimes it's nice to get away with, to get away and read something else. And I really enjoyed that. And there's a sequel that's just come out to that, so I'll be reading that shortly.
Jack?
Denise Miner's The Less Dead was absolutely stunning. I mean, it's set in Glasgow. It's a series of murders, and it's the police ignoring the victims who don't really qualify as good victims. So this is obviously set 20, 30 years in the past, but essentially it's about what makes a good victim as part of from the point of view of the press, and who gets the attention when a murder happens, and whose death gets investigated. And it's a really, really clever, visceral political book without ever once mentioning politics, and it's a great, great crime novel. I liked Rankin's finishing of the McIlvanney Laidlaw book. I thought he caught William McIlvanney's voice beautifully, and you can't see the seams. If there were scenes, and I know because I listened to him speak at the Edinburgh Festival, that he had some scenes, he had not other scenes. He didn't know how it ended. He didn't really know how it began, but he did have a coda. So he did have a kind of epilogue, and it's really interesting to watch somebody put somebody else's voice to dispose of his own voice and write literally through somebody else. That I thought was incredibly clever. The other book I loved was John Connolly's Nameless Ones, which I don't know if you know the John Connolly series, but they're crime novels with a very supernatural bent, and he's got two gay characters, Angel and Louis, and they've been in the back of Charlie Parker's entire series for maybe 20 years, and this time round he's given them their own book, and for me that's amazing, because I've been waiting for them to have a book of their own, and they go to Amsterdam and get involved in the most horrific crime that then throws them back into the whole Balkan Wars and the politics of the Balkan Wars, and how all the people who were essentially the commandos and the special forces then went on and became criminals, and how incredibly dangerous they were, because they had all started, in incredibly dangerous places doing incredibly horrific things, and then had no filter thereafter. So that's really clever. But can I also just put in a thing for a fourth, which is Denise Miner's Rizzio, which isn't a crime novel as such, but is about the weekend in which Mary, Queen of Scots' Italian secretary, is killed by her husband. And it's very short, it's very punchy, it's very modern, it's a stunning book.
Good to know.
I've been asked about my top read or top 10 yet. I have decided, Donna, but you're going to have to wait to find out what they all are. I do have a list. But I will mention one of them, and it's been in my top 10, so it's not a surprise to anyone. It's been in my top 10 reads since I read it in January, and I think you would really like it, Daniel. It's a book called Witness X by Sarah Moorhead.
Yeah, Leslie mentioned it to me. She said it was not a cyber thriller, but like a techno thriller, right?
Yeah, it's like comparisons to Philip K. Dick are very fair.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So it's well worth a read.
Witness X, yeah, it's on my to be read list, along with about 7,000 other books. So it's yeah, crime. I think crime novels and searching crime fiction is probably the biggest rabbit hole I think any of us have ever tumbled down. So yeah.
Yeah.
I've got to be honest, my top 10 list isn't all crime.
No.
Because I do read sort of outside the genre.
That's good.
It's I think it's not just rewarding too. I mean, obviously, I don't disparage anybody choosing to read within or outside of any genre, but I always try and read. I never try and read two books of the same genre concurrently. I always try and kind of switch genres and kind of do that. And it's I think very easy. Well, at least I feel very, very fatigued, kind of writing crime and then researching crime and looking at what other authors are doing and spending a lot of time kind of marketing crime and talking about crime and speaking about crime, and then to go and read other crime novels. It feels kind of very fatiguing. So I always like to kind of dip into something kind of quite outside of crime as well. And I feel like it teaches you as an author to write other things. And I think you can always take elements from other genres and bring them into your work. And
definitely.
That's where the excitement is.
There's a good question from Laura Hamilton that she's asked, that she says the opposite of taking things out. Do any of you provide additional content, e.g. like on your websites or things like that, such as song playlists, pictures of locations that inspired you, true stories that acted as inspiration? She's on a reading platform apparently that where authors often do this, and it adds to the story or atmosphere. Do you want to start us off, Daniel?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I put a short story in at the end of the second book in the D.I. Johansen series, Rising Tide. That was at the back, and I think my Instagram has a couple of kind of photos of things that are kind of inspiring, and I try and do videos and posts and things about kind of what I'm doing in my kind of personal life and my journey and that sort of thing, and talking about the books, and try and do as many lives as I can, where I hope readers tune in and ask questions that they kind of feel are things they'd like to know more about it. For me, I always want that to be a very organic thing. I don't necessarily take sort of heavy inspiration from one thing. I like to kind of magpie from everything. So, but there are some new kind of social media platforms and things coming out for authors now that I've got my sort of eye on that I feel kind of may offer that they kind of trying to make kind of the distance between novel and reader smaller by offering kind of authors a really interactive way and kind of multimedia way of connecting with their readers. So I think that it's definitely going to become more normalized, especially as the social media kind of age continues to progress and continues to create a kind of a shorter distance between people generally. So I think that novels will have to evolve to become not just you buy it in a shop, you enjoy it, and then you leave it there, but will become more of an interactive medium, hopefully. And so as of yet, not a whole lot, but I think that we'll all be forced to kind of step into that role. Hi, sorry, my dog's no, just knocked some wires over. Sorry.
Helen?
Yeah, I haven't done much of it yet. For my novel that's coming out in January, Deception, I have some photographs on my website that inspired it. I just put them up by way of, to fill a space pending, showing the cover of the book. But it certainly struck me it was a good thing. It was a good thing to do. And if I was to go back to all of the novels, there'll be, I'm sure several interesting stories, a lot of photographs, maybe some videos of locations and places that I think might be very interesting to readers. So it's certainly something I'm keen to try and do. And I know there are a lot of platforms, that I haven't explored yet. One of them being TikTok. A lot of people are talking about TikTok for authors. And it may be the case that, there's something on there, but I think probably that's a little bit away for me anyway. I think I really would quite like to concentrate on getting a bit more content just up on my website for readers. Yeah, it's a great idea.
And Jack?
I tend to put up pictures of where I am and what I'm doing on Insta. So if I'm going to a location, you can probably work out what the story is or what the locations are simply by what goes up. But that's usually in advance of writing it rather than after writing it. I mean, the last thing I did that tied in was there was a CD with the Ashraf Bey books of North African music. And I think that's the last thing that tied in together. I mean, I know that lots of people do Spotify lists of what they've been listening to or the tracks that inspired them while they were writing, but I've never actually put one of those together. I mean, the CD is the last thing I did. And also I do Twitter. I mean, I have Twitter, Facebook and Insta. And trying to write when you're already doing those three is quite hard enough as it is without, Although you're right, TikTok is probably something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, the next one probably.
The next one.
Donna has said that as a reader, she loves photos of locations and inspiration. I'm going to admit I like the same. There's a lot of authors that I read and follow on Facebook and things who do that, like posts. I'm thinking Liz Mystery is a really good example. She writes in Bradford and she'll often post in the run up to release day photos of locations she's used in the book. And I really like that because you can then picture it really easily.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
It's a good point, and it's interesting when you sort of talk about that. Book talk is apparently a really big thing.
Book talk?
Yeah, it's like book TikTok. I don't have a TikTok. I try and avoid as much social media as I can. She says running a book group. Yeah, apparently book talk is making some books really big.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It just, like all social media, requires such a large amount of consistent effort and time, and it's while trying to kind of hold down, a day job, or trying to kind of, as Jack said, kind of write and edit and put out Facebook and Twitter and this and that, and do your research and find time to sleep and it's it's a lot, and I admire anybody who takes the kind of the time and the dedication to kind of really seriously build their social media presence and build their social media following, especially with TikTok, and some of the quality of the videos that people kind of, the production value, the production time and quality that people kind of put into their videos is staggering. And I think that my fellow authors would probably agree with me that anything worth doing is worth doing right, and just kind of sticking a toe in just feels, for me, not as fruitful as dedicating that time, I think, to, I don't know, writing. Maybe.
Donna's saying it's a young person's game.
Yeah.
I'm definitely too old for TikTok. We've got 2 minutes left.
Should we talk about cold weather?
Well, with our 2 minutes left.
30 seconds each.
I know, we started off a bit with locations, didn't we? And then we got distracted. Let's have a reminder of yourselves and your book. So show off your lovely book covers, things like that.
Should I do that so you can superimpose it? Sorry, because I moved to Canada recently, everybody, and I couldn't bring any books with me. So I've got nothing here, and there's no mail coming either. I've got a couple of copies of Angel Maker in the mail, and it's just held up by all the floods and destruction and everything. So yeah, you'll just have to imagine.
I will give you all admin permission now to go in after this. Pop a link into one of your books.
All right, good.
Just say I've approved it. The joy of being an admin. Helen?
Right, I think I'll give this a plug. Deception. I did hold it up earlier, but as I said, it's coming out on January the 17th. It's set in Edinburgh. It's a nice wintry Edinburgh scene on the front. It involves a young mother who finds herself in a difficult and dangerous relationship with a fiancé who is not all that he seems, and she ends up embroiled in a web of deceit that endangers her friends, her future with their son, and her life. And it features an interesting and quite unusual cast of characters brought together in adversity. So just ask people to look out for that in January the 17th. Thank you.
Nice. And Jack?
Moskva is the first of the Tom Fox novels, and it opens with a body, small, with a body of the naked boy being found by someone in the Politburo in the Red Square in the winter of '85, and it ends with a wolf outside Stalingrad, or Volgograd as it was by then. The new one, which has absolutely, this is almost pure winter. The new one, which has absolutely no winter in it at all, is set in the Channel Islands, the only part of the UK to be invaded by the Germans in the Second World War, and is set in the 2-3 weeks after the invasion, and is based on the islanders and the Germans trying to work around the rules which govern them, and a murder, and so who takes responsibility for that, and who gets blamed, and who gets, you know, effectively set up or not set up. I mean, it's also got Wallace Simpson and Edward, you know, so if you want devious, not to mention deviant royals, you've got those. Plus walk-on parts for quite a lot of historical characters, which was a really interesting thing to do, to make up fictional characters with my Edinburgh safecracker and con man having to go in and mix with people who were actually real in places that were actually real, with events that were actually real. So that was an interesting lot of research.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds great.
It does.
Thank you.
Excellent.
It does. Don't forget, pop a link in, each of you, to my exhibition after this.
Thank you.
And then thank you
you.
very much. There's some lovely comments on there, Daniel and Helen, about your books right at the end. But I'll finish us off with a thank you all for joining us.
Great.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for these comments.
And,
Thank you.
then
Have a
we
great
have-
Christmas.
Yeah, sorry, go on.